Good morning. Well, thank you. Okay, I'm a recovering politician. And my name is Dennis Eckart, and Jesse, of all the introductions I've ever received, that is by far the most recent. We're going to, how much time do I have? What's the clock here on this?
Let's see, I think I have you for about...
Actually, you should never ask that question until you're halfway into your speech. And then when they say you're just about done, you know how well you're doing.
About 45 minutes.
Okay, cool. Then we're going to have to do this real fast. I want your name and why you're here.
Yvonne Delgado Canis to learn.
Bernardo Martinez, part of the leadership program. Learning about.
Buenos dias.
Zach Siebert, relationship building.
Shane Yanni, this is where the bus stops.
Jody Travers, networking.
Jennifer McLaughlin, to learn about Lincoln.
Cool.
Aaliyah Baraka, meet like-minded people.
Like-minded people.
Scott Ackerberg, networking.
Jenny Billy, learning.
Dean Polonaro, discover more about the county history.
Always learning more. When you stop learning, they just drop you off at All Souls, you know.
Sue Wilkowski, just an experience living on more.
Excellent.
Learn more about the county.
Kim Simchek, learning more also.
No more learning more answers now. That's it. We've exhausted our learning more answers.
Beth Wolverine, to continue to grow in connections with the community.
Miguel Solivan, learning more about the county, but also where I can contribute.
That's an excellent piece and part to the answer. Yes.
Scott Ackerberg.
You already spoke. I just wanted to see if you were paying attention. Right there.
Robin Hopkins to grow and learn about Lake County. Emerson, learning and discover.
Mario Dugan, since everyone, majority, learn more about Lake County Road.
Excellent.
Ashley Elcory, learning and networking.
And Pachano, I just want to start volunteering more within the county.
Nobody said they wanted to get a day off from work yet. So that's good. Yes.
What was the question?
Your name and why you're here.
All right. Joshua Strickland, and I'm here because I'm helping the new class with their history day.
This is a good deal. Yes.
Randy Fife, networking and just get outside the box.
Kent Dale to get more involved, and because my boss says so.
It's a very good answer.
So I'm here for the Leadership Lake County program, and I'm in the program to learn more about how I can contribute.
And do you have a name to go with this exercise?
Justin McIntyre.
Thank you.
Mark Flash, learn more about Lake County and meet a lot of leaders within the county.
Sanjay Barker, I'm here to bask in the excellence of my peers.
Now there's a guy headed somewhere. Please.
Scott Modic, and I'm here to just meet with people and about the county.
I'm here to learn more about Lake County and meet new people.
Erica Phillips, individual and professional growth.
Sarah Baggett. I'm here to explore community collaboration in Lake County.
I'm Mandy Osborne. I'm here to get more engaged in the community.
Chris Bohacka, leadership development.
Shana Boyd, I'm looking to experience the Lake County treasures.
Chris Elliott, learn and network.
Nicole Rodriguez, to get more involved with the community and network.
I'm Mike Brown, I'm here for self-discovery.
Mike Conrad here for personal growth.
And you dare wear a Cleveland Browns colored shirt today?
Of course.
Ah,
Always support it.
takes me back to a horrible evening. Yes.
I'm Ryan Gilbertson. I want to be a better leader in the county, and I'd like to know more about it so that I can do that.
Carrie Morgan, professional development. Art Freed, relationship building.
Christina Percy, networking and learn how I can engage more in volunteer opportunities.
Matt Sagal, just to network and get better connected with the county.
Joe Busher, expand my knowledge base of the county network.
We have a few on the periphery. Are you just observing? You hanging out? Did they let you in? You're at the wrong house?
You're talking to me or Brian? Jamie, no, they should play county in here because it's my job.
Excellent. A truthful answer.
And Brian, if you're supposed to, we're here a lot.
You're running the camera.
I am.
We know why you're here.
Brett Fraser, class of 16, I'm being paid.
Excellent. Excellent. And I'm not, so it's been a wonderful morning to be with you all. I mentioned I'm a retired politician, and I was first elected when I was 23 years old. So you could imagine when that happened, the average age of the voter in Lake County was 46. So why did I win? I was every mother's son. And the truth of that election time, which was first in Euclid in 1974, is reflective of a lot of what I'm going to talk about. What I'm doing now, though, I am growing grapes, and we're a few days away. We have a vineyard. I own a couple of farms, about 270 acres. A couple of locations. I actually came from one, which is why I still have the tennis shoes, still have my soft shoes on. We make vodka out of Concord grapes. And as you're going to hear throughout my commentary, the National Archives in Washington, D.C., on the foundation stone, they have 3 words: past is prologue. So back in the 1930s, my family was arrested for bootlegging in Cleveland, and I am not far from my roots. Past is prologue, but this time I pay taxes and have a license to do it. I don't have any animals on the farm. It's all row crops. I was a gardener when I was a little boy living in Euclid, and my grandmothers both had the most incredible gardens back in the city. And I think that's kind of what I want to talk about a little bit today. I'm going to use your table as my prop for the water. I'm going to talk about 2 things, and they may or may not seem connected to you, but hopefully will all tie together when we get down to it. I'm going to talk about places, and I'm going to talk about arrows. Okay? Because if we believe what the National Archives tells us, that past is prologue, and the only things you don't know is the history you have forgotten. And if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. It all does kind of come together and describe what Lake County is on the south shore of Lake Erie. Because you see, over 500 years ago, the people who lived here first were growing grapes and making wine. Today in Ashtabula County, the third largest source of their income is agritourism and winemaking. Over 500 years, not much has really changed, has it? Maybe the quality of the wine is a little different, and for whom they make it and how they make it. Those are very primitive Concord grapes, went through a significant evolution, originally bought after they were domesticated by a company called Welch's. We were once the home of the world's largest jelly conglomeration in the world. Past is prologue. So the first place of the first people who lived here was because of 3 or 4 very incredible things. Woods, water, proximity to incredible natural resources, and we don't like it in the wintertime, but a climate that was conducive to enjoying all aspects of a natural life. And if you believe in a life circle, there's a beginning and there's an end, and there's whole bunches of places in the middle. And so for the first people who came here, this was about a place. But then there was this next wave of place, and there's a reason we're called the Western Reserve. Because those effete snobs of the East Coast, when America was carved up after our independence, actually it preceded independence, each of the East Coast colonies received opportunities to own land further west. This was the expansionist destination of the country, founded by a whole bunch of people who came here for a new place too, from all around, principally around Europe, and many millions of folks who didn't choose this as their place. They came here in leg irons in the bowels of ships. But America was first and principally most a place. And Lake County was principally a place for these small states of Connecticut and Rhode Island and Delaware, which I guess really aren't states if you sort of think about it differently. And it was their Western Reserve, hence what we are thought of as the Western Reserve. And when they came here, they had very peculiar traits, very peculiar traits. They were looking for a new place. They came west. They were looking for a new place. They came with sort of Calvinistic kinds of beliefs. So not Calvinism practiced per se, but hard work, a belief in the Lord's Word, and the ability for your family to prosper. Hard work, Lord's Word, and family to prosper drove them here to a new place, right? And when they got here, they left the crowded confines of the East Coast and found water and found trees. They found rivers. They found this beautiful lake. And so they could practice what they believed in this new place as a sense of freedom and opportunity for them. And so this new place brought with them this sort of flinty fiscal conservatism of Connecticut, but incredibly socially liberal thinking. In fact, they were amongst the first to support the suffragettes. They were amongst the first, few people know this, that we were a destination on the Underground Railroad. We were one of the first communities in the country to elect an abolitionist to the United States Congress, because they didn't believe what the Constitution said, that these were 3/5 of a person. They didn't believe that there was a gender inequality. Of course, almost all the men kept all the women at home while they had their 11 children. But they toted all of those 11 children with their Bible to Sunday services and believed that hard work, belief in the Lord's Word, and the natural resources and all that was the rest of it, in a place that they could be respected, could give them a home. This whole idea of place and an arrow of movement continues to show up in Lake County's history to this day, and I think it actually defines us in a very clear way. There was another sense of movement, okay? Another wave of people seeking places. Now, these were Germans. These were Italians. These were Poles. These were Irish. And they started to come in the 70s, early 70s, late 70s, culminating to a point in 1910 of all these people seeking a new place, following their arrow to the new world, that in the 1910 census, in the city of Cleveland proper, 65% of the people living in the city of Cleveland were immigrants. I want you to think about that for a second. So they kind of bypassed Lake County, which at that point was still a reliably Republican, principally agricultural community. It did have an excellent port at Fairport, which was a way station, by the way, because the steamers didn't have enough coal to make it all the way from the New York and the Pennsylvania harbors to Cleveland. It had something called a river. We had several of them. And so the things that made Lake County important to the Native Americans, this place became important to the first generation Western reservists, and would soon become important to the next wave that were coming here. We voted reliably Republican in all of those years. In fact, produced a president from here, who unfortunately never got to fulfill his destiny because of course, an assassination. But consistent with that sense of place, those first Calvinistic-like settlers, and like the second wave of immigrants coming here, paramount importance to them was the ability of their kids to be able to do better. I want you to think about that. Hiram College, Lake Erie College. We were amongst the first to create private colleges in the New World being the Western Reserve, from the Old World being the East Coast, and continued to value that because they knew that their kids would not have a better world if they didn't have a better education. So they valued the natural resources, they valued the space, they valued the geography and the geology of what the region gave them. But they knew if that's all they stood for, and if that's how they stayed, they never would see their families grow. Now, they reacted to others who came through here. Just a few miles from here, we have the Kirtland Temple. The classic conflict there was one of the three principles that brought the East Coasters here. belief in the Word of God, conflicted with a bunch of people who had a different sense of what that Word of God meant to them. And so we made it very uncomfortable back then for the Mormons here. And of course, you will learn all about that history as well. But once again, Lake County was we were principally here as a place. A bunch of folks came in the 70s and the 80s and into the 90s, growing this huge population, and Cleveland became very crowded. You know, in the 1940s and the 1950s, we were the 7th or 8th largest city in America. But now we were busting at the seams. And guess what happened, Yvonne? All these people who came here to Cleveland for a place now wanted a place too, right? And what did they want in the 1950s? What did the 20 and the 30-year-olds want in the 1950s?
A house.
They wanted their own place too, right? And how did they define a place? Front yard, backyard with a barbecue, a little league, a Kiwanis club, their own church. And so all of those groups that established a place in Cleveland came back. They changed directions. They went west and they came back east. Because why? They could get their backyard, they could get their barbecue, they could get their church, they could get a high-quality school. To the point that in a survey in the 1960s, local public education in Lake County was voted by its peers in an analysis by the State of Public Education as home to some of the best local school districts in the state. Continuing that first settlers' emphasis, natural resources, protecting and preserving, hard work, living in a community that's yours, and providing a clear future for your children, brought a migration back. So they followed another arrow to a different place. The statistics are incredible when you look at them. From 1920 to 1940, Lake County's population doubled. From 40 to 50, it increased 2/3. From 50 to 60, it doubled again. And from 60 to 70, it went up another third. So in the space of 4 censuses, censi, whatever it is, our county went from, virtual rural, virtually natural resource, agricultural driven, to this incredible polyglot of people that skipped over us and came back, but for the exact same reasons that the first people came here. So when we talk about Lake County today, it's not a whole lot different than Lake County yesterday, or the yesterdays before. With that incredible growth, now, a lot of things started to change. Beginning in the 1950s, that progressive but fiscally conservative attitude showed up again. It showed up in the form of labor unions. You don't have this kind of population growth without what following it? Jobs. Why was the Great Lakes Mall sited here? Why did we once have Caterpillar and RB&W? I mean, these major Tyler Road manufacturing sites. The factories followed the people followed the factories. The arrow turned around. And when this arrow turned around, our population grew like crazy. But the people still valued hard work. They still valued connectivity. They still valued their religion. The religion majority switched from Protestantism to Catholicism. And now the single largest faith in this county, which measures just simply by what you declare yourself, not whether you make it every Sunday, is one of the largest self-professed religious counties in the state of Ohio. Think about that for a second. This incredible growth, this massive change, this complete influx of brand new people who first came to Cleveland, then maybe moved into Little Italy, and then maybe tried, Mayfield. They said they still didn't like Mayfield, came out here to the farms. Now, by the way, they weren't the only people who came out here to the farms. John D. Rockefeller was out here on his own farm. Look at a house like this. The Ratners, founders of Forest City, were out here on their own summer estate. Because what was transpiring then from the late 19th century into the 20th century is that 40 of the wealthiest families in the city of Cleveland owned significant properties in Lake County. So it wasn't just the workers who were going to be migrating here, it was the wealth that was migrating here. Why do you think we have the Holden Arboretum in Lake County? It's because the very same people who now had made their millions in downtown Cleveland recognized the same thing that the first settlers and the Native Americans knew about Lake County, and that was its incredible space and its incredible wealth of natural resources. So the wealthy and the workers knew that Lake County was a place to be. The politics changed, though, as those turnover of new people came. It was no longer reliably Republican. It became a bellwether county. In 1974, the first time I ran, which I mentioned a moment ago, somebody from NBC was talking to me, and they were telling me about how Lake County, they didn't care how Ohio voted, they just watched Lake County. And because I hated math in college, I took courses in statistics and in statistical analysis instead. And so I kind of paid attention to that and to demographics and demographic switches and trends. And what they were telling me from NBC is what we discovered was the case for almost 50 years. And that is, you did not have to look up who won or what the totals were for the state of Ohio. All you had to do was watch how Lake County voted. Because from every election, starting in 1959 till 2005, the way Lake County voted is how Ohio voted. So why do you think the first appearance that John F. Kennedy made after that famous television debate with Richard Nixon, anybody know where? Hell Regals in the heart of Lake County. And that when they took a motorcade down Euclid Manor to Euclid Avenue, all the Catholic schools let the kids out. Religion, Catholicism on the rise, ethnic neighborhoods that reflected in some ways Kennedy's own Boston, the rising strength of unions, which were predominantly Democrat, the rising strength of immigrants who skipped Lake County to go to Cleveland to raise their kids, to move them to where the Little Leagues and the Kiwanis clubs were, right? Could get a front yard and a backyard barbecue. Came out to give John F. Kennedy one of the most impressive welcomes. If you've not ever seen any small, there's some black and white and some photos of it, to line Euclid Avenue as his motorcade went back downtown. The biggest crowds for Abraham Lincoln's funeral cortege to Illinois with his body after his assassination was in Northeast Ohio. We are people who honor leadership because of those traditional values: hard work, a belief in the Word of God, and the strength of the community and our family around us. Didn't change from Lincoln's death ultimately to Kennedy's death, because it was the same underlying values that ended up with this unique collection or collaboration of people. With this incredible growth, though, that happened, the county was now bursting at the seams. I mean, I'm absolutely serious. 100%, 50%, 100%, 35%. But then it became 8%, and then 2.1%, and then 1.7%. So what happened was now is that Lake County was becoming middle-aged. If a county was a human, obviously when your entire growth rate, your biggest growth spurts were 50 or 60 years ago, as many of us find out as we get old, we start to grow, but in the wrong ways. But as they understood that growth coming in the 1960s, this whole progressive, so the progressive side of the Calvinist commitment to community values, they now define family as a little larger than just my brothers and sisters, led them to do some of the most progressive things of any county in the state of Ohio. We got tired of waiting for the city of Cleveland to put in water lines, because we were building houses so fast we couldn't put the water lines in fast enough. So what did we do? We created our own water department. We got tired of public utilities ripping off people, so what did? We created an electric co-op. We were making and selling electricity in this county before anybody else in the state was. We weren't going to rely on those big utilities. What did we do in the 1960s? We valued our family's intellectual curiosity, and were one of the first counties in the state to do what? We created a community college. And we taxed ourselves for it. We got tired of going downtown to hospitals for health care. And so when Congress in 1948 passed the Hill-Burton Act, which created the concept of community hospitals, in other words, health care given in the community closest to the patients from which it draws its population, draws its patients. And so what do? We created an independent health care system. Now, these things were unheard of at the time, and they were so progressive that the actual motto of this county back then was, we were a progressive county. Now, by the way, that is considered a pejorative in some political contexts today. If you say I'm a progressive, they say you're really just trying to hide the fact that you're liberal. But this county reacted positively based on the same values that the first settlers brought here. They defined their family a little bigger. They defined the goal of personal enrichment bigger than just putting plants in the ground. You know, at one time, the dirt that the glaciers left behind made us the nursery capital of the world. There wasn't a potted plant in the entire northeast quadrant of the United States sold at Kmart that didn't come from Lake County. So we grew, and we continued to grow, but we grew on the same progressive values. I'll call them progressive. They might not have called them progressive themselves then. That brought them here to begin with. And what else did we do? We created one of the most robust park systems in the state at that time in the 1960s. Still considered one of the best. I can say that because I was a board member. Because of what? We wanted a place. For the same reason that the Native Americans wanted to be here and the first settlers wanted to be here because of the trees and the waters and the woods and the lake, we realized that that sense of place that the people wanted who were moving from Little Italy to Wycliffe or from Little Italy to Mentor was an additional sense of place. They wanted some space. So the 20 and 30-year-olds in the 1950s, when we think about the 20 and 30-year-olds of 2020, which is where I'm going with this conversation, are not going to be a whole lot different than those that came here a long time ago. This ability of the politics of the community should not be lost upon it. For the longest time, we were one of the counties to be the most generous in terms of our taxing. In other words, we would pass levies to actually support things because we made a community judgment to do so. Think about trying to pass a levy to create a community college today. The conversation is a lot less about what's the benefit of it and a lot more about what does it benefit me. So we had this arrow passing us, coming to us, passing us, coming back to us. Had this incredible growth spurt, but what happens, as I mentioned, you become middle-aged, right? You have this huge growth spurt. Those numbers I told you about, the census from 40 to 50, 50 to 60, 60 to 70, 70 into 80. You couldn't put up a house fast enough in Lake County. You couldn't get water services fast enough. The utilities, the demands. The schools were being built at the rate of each school district one new building a year. An entire new building a year. Not a classroom, not an adjunct, an entire new building a year. To the point we added high schools. When I went to St. Joe's graduated in 68, at 2:45, there were 30 buses lined up down that road where St. Joe's is, where Euclid Glenville Hospital used to be. And every single kid ran out of there after the announcements at 2:37 to get on their bus to go where? Lake County. Lake County built Lake Catholic. The diocese added more parishes. The community invested in itself with those incredible commitments to an infrastructure, health care, education, other infrastructures, parks. All to do what? To preserve a sense of place. So as we did this, we did sustain a change in our economic model as well. What brought the first people here, a tremendous investment in agriculture because of the proximity to water and woods and the like, didn't actually go away. We were the largest exporter of nursery products in the United States. That hasn't changed. As I mentioned, in Ashtabula County, and it's fourth in Lake County, the single largest source of our new growth income is agritourism, wineries. It is an outgrowth of those first grapes that the Native Americans made into something called, or that was approximated wine. It might have been closer to what the natives in Chile and Peru make, which is called pisco, which is a lot closer to the vodka that I make as opposed to the wine. But it is still a predicate based upon where our roots are, both literally and figuratively. Those arrows were all up, or center, or left and right, east and west. But when we look at Lake County today, we look at the sense of place and we look at where are the arrows today. We are decidedly middle-aged. We grew like crazy from the 40s to the 80s. And if we were born then, I was born in 50, I'm 69, I'm past middle age. And Lake County is in its middle ages, or maybe slightly past, because the arrows are no longer anymore going up. And this is where your leadership role is going to be significant. For the first time in the history of this county, our birth-death rate is 0. We are not growing in population. Oh, there might be a statistical increase of 1% or so, but that is negligible. We are exporting people from Lake County. And who are we exporting? We are exporting teenagers, but the single biggest deterrent to our young people leaving here is an investment we made in '68 in Lakeland Community College. Why? Because a majority of the folks who graduate from Lakeland Community College, a school in our backyard that is incredibly reasonably priced, gives us a 2 in 3 chance that that young person stays here. How smart were we in 1968? We don't have to hustle it up now. We can keep our young people, but we are still exporting them. You know what the greatest single destination, there are 2 great destinations for folks over 60 in Lake County. We export them to Florida and All Souls Cemetery. The loss of our adult population is an actual slightly down arrow because it does not sustain the growth that's needed. As you all know, in whatever it is that you do, businesses that remain stagnant begin to falter. Their reason for existence is no longer in front of them. They now manage constriction, they manage competition, they manage a shrinking market. So our arrows are off. Our birth-death rate is flat. Our per capita income is flat. Now, by the way, it's high flat. Why? Because in the 70s, we had a hell of a lot of great jobs. And we had a lot of unions, as I mentioned, who drove both the benefit wage package and the security of their jobs. So even as unions shrunk in terms of their membership in our community, these people persisted because they were union retirees. So they lived on their nice pensions in our community, but then they moved to Florida or to All Souls Cemetery. That arrow is decidedly flat. For six censi in a row, our home values increased. For the first census, we are going to see stagnant home value increase. And for most people, Beth, as you know, the single biggest asset they have in their financial portfolio is what? Their home. Per capita income is stagnant, is flat. But it's generously high flat because of those pensions. Our average age is increasing because our birth rate is so low. When we look at the high value added items to our economy, the single highest value added you find on Tyler Road, all those incredible machine shops that are there, which are still incredibly viable in the advanced manufacturing society, but they're not Caterpillars. You know, that one big, huge building we used to have right there off of Route 2. And you got to have many dozens of those smaller buildings to make up a big, huge building like that. It's a great job and a great place. You can go there and you can make a significant income. The key will be to provide the work skills now, that transition that we started with when the first settlers came here, to using the natural resources, the proximity to transportation, the proximity to advanced education, and a community that works. So when we look at Tyler Boulevard, we know that there still is a predicate for that here. We look at the fastest growing employment segment in Lake County, and it is what? Healthcare. Who touches the healthcare industry in here some way, shape, or form? Okay, so you understand what I'm saying. Great demand for geriatric care, nurses' aides. You do the math, when you look at the census, you see the single largest growing population segment is what? 60 plus, right? I don't like that at 69. But with an independent health care system, a strong, what I call secondary living. My mom is in Breckenridge. She's 93 plus. okay, cruising, she's still independent living. Her needs are a lot different than when she had the house with the front yard, the backyard barbecue, sending kids to St. Williams, and a husband with a nice job who was, a city councilman and president of the Euclid Vets and did the Memorial Day Parade. That quintessential 1950s family now lives in the high-rise at Breckenridge. And instead of 5 of them, well, I guess we still count me and my brothers and our kids, but there's really only 1 of her, right? So it's 1 less vote. My mother's a traditional New Dealer FDR Democrat. Okay, you got to break her arm to vote for a Republican, unless he or she is ethnic, or a she. So she's become somewhat advanced in her political thinking too, I would suggest. So the point is that the arrows we look at today are not favorably inclined to the arrows that we were looking at since I don't want to say since the opening of Lake County in 1847, but certainly for the last 100 years, 1920 to 2020, when we saw that growth. So what's the future? So what does this mean for today? I think the 20 or 30-year-olds of 2020 are thinking exactly like the 20 and 30-year-olds of 1950 and 1920. The 20 and 30-year-olds of today, they want a place. They don't want the backyard with the barbecue. They want the beachfront. They want the river. They want the park. They want a sense of place that enables them to embrace nature, not manage it and own it. They want a sense of a future for their kids, which means a deep-seated ongoing commitment to post-secondary education. When I ran the Cleveland Chamber of Commerce, I brought Mayor Daley from Chicago here. And he said, most fundamental difference, and I said there's a lot of differences between Chicago and Cleveland, but the most fundamental difference he said about the difference between Chicago and Cleveland, and when I thought about it, he was right. He said, we embraced Lake Michigan and you've turned your back on it. I want you to think about that for a second. Where did we put our railroads? Right next to the lake. Where did we put the freeway in downtown Cleveland? Right next to the lake. Where did we build a 12,000-acre dump that we turned into an airport in Cleveland? Right next to the lake. They didn't do that in Chicago. The lake was a place for the Native Americans, and the lake is a place, and the rivers are a place, and our parks are a place for modern-day Americans, 20 and 30 years old, who aren't going to have 11 children, but who, whatever the number of kids they have, they want to know they have a future. And they actually want a future that they know might not be in Ohio, but boy, they sure wish it would be in Ohio, close to Grandma and Grandpa. So the 20 and 30-year-olds today are thinking about actually the same things. And it's incumbent upon us, and you as the next generation of leadership in this county, to think of us as a place. What's our assets? How do we preserve them and protect them? Our rivers, our streams, our lakes, our water. How do we create an amenitized life for them? Because you see, they don't, at one point in the 1970s, almost 70% of the people who worked and lived in Lake County went to Cuyahoga County for their paycheck. What's the percentage of that happening today? It's half. What was the percentage of people who worked from home in 1970? You can't measure it, because something like the internet didn't exist. Today we know that a large percentage of those 20 or 30-year-olds in 2020, including folks like me, I mean, hell, I'm not even close to 30 years old anymore, but I can do almost anything I need to do for my clients. I still have some. I'm an attorney. Even when I need to talk to people I'm buying, selling grape juice from, we make, as I say, we make our vodka out of Concord, so I can show you the farm where the future vodka is coming from. I can do that all online. So what I want to know is, when I look out my window at my house, is that I'm in a nice place. That my grandkids got a place to go to school. And that I can enjoy my life. So the amenitization of our place is of critical importance to us. And guess what? We have a lake, we have a river, and nobody else does. The quality of life that's driven first and foremost by the future opportunities for my children is driven by K through 12, of course. But anybody who believes that stopping your education at 12, you have an economic future, is deluding themselves. a college degree of some level, or let me say a post-12th grade professional or college degree, because I don't think everybody needs to go to college. I just finished being the chair of the board at Kent State University, and I couldn't say that then, but Auburn Career Center. Life is now continually learning something. And no matter what you do, if you're in a professional and have any HR capacity, you want to see the capacity of the people you hire to do what? To learn and to grow. Because they don't know what their job description is going to be 3 years after you hire them. And you don't really either, if we're truthful with ourselves. So having that predicate is really important. And so how we think about what you need to be thinking about for the next 20 years, for the 20 to 30-year-olds today, is of critical importance. It all comes down to place. It also comes down to, I believe there is an evolution that's occurred in what I used to really do for a living, and that's politics. For the longest time, government needs to stay the hell out of politics. We know that the expression of the chairman of the board of General Motors in 1957, you know, where he said, what's good for General Motors is good for the USA. I get that. In case we haven't noticed, China's in the world today. I mean, the world has so dramatically changed. But leaving the business of business just to business does not work in the way the huge conglomeration of economics of the world functions. And by the way, to take an isolationist approach to business and think we can just beat up on every other country in the world because they're different from us is absolutely a dead end. But then we went through that phase, right, where government's going to create jobs. Now, how many of you here think that government creates any jobs? It doesn't. When you hear a politician say that he wants to protect jobs, the job he wants to protect the most is his, okay? So what's the new step? The new step is public-private partnerships, where government kind of does what it needs to do. Think back to 1970. We created a sewer and water system, and you were a developer, and you had 30 acres. What did we do? We're going to get you water, and we're going to get you sewer. You build the house, you buy the lots, you subdivide, you sell. We're just going to make sure that you have the infrastructure you need to support your growth. We're not going to build the houses. We're not going to get in the business. So developing a public-private partnership that's predicated on some what? Thoughtful thinking. I used to say planning, and people would roll their eyes and say, oh, government can't plan to deliver the mail on time. But the reality of planning is simply the smart thinking, collective thinking about how to best use our natural resources. Our land, our roads, our highways, our proximity to freeways. Look what Euclid has done with the old abandoned mall now, with a new Amazon fulfillment center there. Government didn't do it. Government facilitated it happening. That's what Lake County needs to be thinking about, is what do we facilitate? What do we preserve and protect in terms of the amenities of our county? What do we do to ensure that every parent and grandparent thinks that their kid or grandchild has a future here? They have to think they have a future here. Otherwise, that flat arrow on birth, death rate, and population growth and income growth is going to go from being flat to start to decline. It is not irreversible. If we do nothing, it will not stay flat. And then what we do is we have a community conversation about planning. What's the best use of our best resources? What are the amenities that will keep people here and keep them happy and productive? And how do we embrace the next opportunity to drive those arrows the way we want them to go and not let gravity drive those arrows? For the longest time, I don't want to suggest to you that from the first wave of Western reservists who came out here that they planned all of this. But it is amazing to look back, Jesse, 300 some years and see the same values show up time and time again. See the community come back to the exact same principles time and time again. To engage in a tremendous period of growth driven by huge investments in ourselves. Water, roads, electricity, education, and planning. We thought about it. One of the first women, there were several incredible women in our county. I would strongly suggest you look at the Bolton family as one of them. They served in Congress. She was my pre-predecessor. She, by the way, gave money to the Mount Vernon Society. If you've ever been to Mount Vernon, George Washington's home, and you look across the river and you see this beautiful forest, and they tell you that's how it looked when George was here, George and Martha were here. She gave them the money to preserve that vista. Took what is a impossible to value piece of property and gave it to the people in perpetuity. They still have significant investments in this county. The Holden family, Holden Arboretum, the Holden Center at Lake County. She convened the first meeting to talk about creating a community college. Gave the first dollar to the campaign to pass the levy. She didn't actually need it, but she knew the community needed it. So our goal as leaders for the next generation, as I go to tend my grapes and, watch the soybeans grow and do whatever it is I do anymore. I actually have a tractor. And by the way, let me tell you, having a tractor is really a cool thing. You bring a load of gravel, they dump it here, you pick the gravel up with the bucket, you take it over here, you put it down here, and it doesn't say, I don't want to be here. It doesn't say, are you going to come back and see me again? It stays there. When you have constituents, you can understand, for all those years that I did, you can understand how cool this is. But my son is going to be 40, which is just shocking me every single day that I think about it. Good grandchildren who are now, nieces and nephews that are having kids. And when I just talk to them over whether it's a family event or something, one just had a baptism, a christening. And my goddaughter said to me, she said, Uncle Denny, I really hope that, this in my arms son, will want to live here. Now, why she would say that at about, 4 months of age is, but that's how we think. And if that's how we think, how about acting that way? So that's your challenge, to think about how a 6-month-old will want to think about things when they're 16. And if we are like the Holdens or the Boltons, just to pick 2 names, not that there are many others that we could pick, but the Holdens and the Boltons thought about not just the next election, the next year. They thought about the next generation. And as a collection of leadership, of this next wave of leadership in Lake County, that's very much how we have to think about it. So God bless you. Thank you for having me.